Joining us now is the president and editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, James Bennet. Ben Domenech is the publisher of The Federalist. Jeanne Cummings is political editor at The Wall Street Journal. And David Rohde writes for Reuters. I want to start, we're going to look back at 2015 and we're going to go on to 2016. So, Ben, I want to start with you. What in 2015 either surprised you the most or did you find the most interesting?
I was surprised the most by how quickly we saw the arguments about free speech become essentially a monopartisan affair. Civil liberties, I think, in America, the conversation about them has largely been a bipartisan one historically. But in the conversation that we saw take place on America's campuses and in our political fray, I think political correctness is now something that has moved over entirely into a conversation on the right. That surprised me to a great degree. The thing that I found most interesting, though, was actually something that Stephen Colbert made reference to in that interview that you had with him, which was the surprise of the Trump phenomenon. This is a significant one. I think it's politically significant in a way that a lot of people didn't expect. People expected a celebrity campaign. I think actually that there's something to be said for finding the good in the Trump phenomenon. He does express, to a certain degree, a degree of Jacksonian populism that has always been a part of American politics, and that I think represents a group of disaffected Americans who basically are standing up and saying the status quo is not acceptable, that they want dramatic change.
What surprised you, Jeanne, this last year?
What surprised me was the collapse of the Republican Party's establishment class. And it's not just the rise of Trump, because they've had candidates like Trump, you know, kind of the outsider candidates come and go, but they can't coalesce in the establishment lane. And it's not just in the presidential campaign, it's the entire House leadership collapsed during this past year because of the push from the outside. And that really surprised me because they've been top down for decades.
Yeah, that's the other side of what Ben's talking about. We keep talking about a grassroots lane and an establishment lane. I'm starting to think that the establishment lane is like a bike lane. It's very small. The other lane is a lot bigger. James, what's your feeling about 2015?
Yeah, I mean, I would go with NASA finding running water on Mars, but after that I'd have to say Donald Trump and this class warfare really within the Republican Party. The base revolting against the donor class on the core issues that the Republican Party has stood for cycle after cycle: tax cuts, budget cuts, deregulation, free trade. Donald Trump is challenging party orthodoxy on all those issues, and it's working for him.
Yeah, so it's not just you have a kind of shiny object candidate. He's illuminating something big. Yeah. That's big blocks that are moving. David, what about you?
This is a little sort of less positive, but it is Trump related, but it's the breadth of the fear of Muslims in this country and the sort of acceptance of open bigotry. We wouldn't have said, you know, it would have been completely unacceptable for someone to say in 2012 a Mormon cannot be the president of the United States. So to have major candidates saying a Muslim can't be the president, and there really wasn't that much of an uproar. I mean, if he had said a radical Muslim, an extremist Muslim, that's absolutely fine. But it's the demagoguery and the tripling in attacks against Muslims. I didn't expect it to get so powerful so quickly, you know, this many years after 9/11.
I feel like, though, that does speak a little bit to, when it comes to Trump's character, his ability to know how to manipulate. He knows how to manipulate a crowd. He knows human folly like the back of his hand, and he knows how to respond to it. But I also think that it speaks to something more significant in the sense that we see this broad-based populist revolt in Europe that comes from both right and left. And I think that we see that echoed in America to a degree that we have not seen historically. And that's something that I think should concern both parties. You saw Bernie Sanders saying earlier that he feels like he can appeal to Trump voters. There is something to that.
Well, and it was striking in your conversation with Bernie Sanders when he talked about the overlap with Trump, how many times he repeated the word anger or angry, that's where the Venn diagram really overlaps for him, and specifically on issues of economic populism and so forth. But it runs counter to something that Stephen Colbert just said, which he thinks Americans are tired of divisiveness.
I do think I was heartened, though, by the very strong pushback by leadership in both parties to the Muslim ban proposal. I mean, to have Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Hillary Clinton, you know, there was very strong pushback on that. And I think for the Muslim community, that had to have been at least somewhat heartening.
Yeah, although you still see in the polls that there's a still support for it within the Republican Party, and Donald Trump certainly didn't seem to fall from that.